I have one final question before we get to some of the audience questions that I'd love each of you to kind of touch on. And it's a really simple question. You know, why democracy, right? I think, you know, we have seen, I think there are polls that show something like 55% of millennials globally say they're dissatisfied with democracy. You know, what is your pitch to the younger generation on why democracy itself is critical and why it's something worth fighting for? I'd love to hear just from each one of you before we move on.
Thank you. Because why not? I mean, you know, now we are having this panel is really encouraging to have this discussion and talk about our, you know, human challenges that we have in our line of work very openly without facing any consequences. I don't have to fear that police will break into my home now and arrest me. That's the part of the human rights. That's the part of the democratic values, and that's what we are fighting for. And because otherwise, you know, we are talking about China, Venezuela, all these countries have similarities of repression going on. People are being arrested for standing up for their rights. People are being arrested and tortured for speaking about truth. So I think democratic value is very important. And in Burma, because we have a lot of diversity, ethnicities in the country, so people are not calling for simple democracy anymore. People are calling for federal democracy with proper, genuine, you know, federalism. So it's a very encouraging step for us to move forward. And if we don't have any democracy, or I know, you know, in Western countries, is not a perfect democracy either. There are so many challenges, but at least we are able to go out freely, at least, and we are able to converse freely about what we believe in. So I think these values are very important, and I know it's a work in progress in Western countries as well, and it's part of our job and individual duties to uphold these values and hold them leaders accountable if they, you know, stray from the path as well. So that's what I believe in.
Yeah, maybe I could jump into it. I believe democracy is definitely more than a system. It's more than an election. It's more than votes. It's about how we live our life and how we have a system that could respect everyone's choice, promote diversity, promote basic respect to everyone. So I think sometimes, yes, indeed, well, in democracy, we may make mistakes. We may have election results that may damage the democratic values in its essence. But this is definitely the learning process that we have to adopt. At the end of the day, democracy is the protection of our other important aspects, like rule of law, like basic human rights, like freedom. In Hong Kong's case, you could really see that a city once so free, but without the protection of democracy, without holding the government accountable, your freedom and your rule of law could be lost in just 1 year, in just a glimpse. So I think this is what democracy is important, it is about, and that's why we have to protect that as a system and as a value.
I can just add to previous speakers that democratic countries are usually prosperous as well. So democracy brings many other things, but also it's very important that democracy must go together with independence. For countries like Belarus, it's super important. Sometimes we are given the choice, like you should decide or democracy or independence. In our case, the propaganda says, if you'll be democratic, you will become part of Russia, or you will have dictatorship but independent state. And this is the false dilemma. And I think in many countries around the world, such dilemma exists. We should not support it. We should break this dilemma. It's fake. It's false. We can get both, and sovereignty and freedom. Democracy is also something that must be learned. We see that countries with many years of non-democratic regime, for them it takes much longer to build sustainable democracies. And those who have democratic traditions since Middle Ages, for example, for them it could be much easier to get back to this. So democracy must be learned. It must be something that everyone must enjoy.
I agree with all what my colleague said, and as Nathan said, democracy is more than just elections. It's more than that. As I said before, these dictatorial regimes also use elections as a way to show the world that they are being democratic. I think, for example, rule of law is not the rule of law from the Americans, from the understanding of the Americans is totally different from my understanding. I mean, rule of law can be used. I mean, they could be the Nazi rule of law, and where laws and judges do things against human rights, and there can be the Russian rule of law, the Venezuelan rule of law, or the government, the rule of law that they use. Rule of law, for example, I believe is more than rule of law as such. It's the democratic rule of law. What is democratic rule of law? And that means the respect of human rights, for example. That means the understanding that elections is not just the only way to show that you are a democratic regime. It's more than that. It's, for example, the independence of the judicial system, the freedom of a speech, the freedom of walking, on the streets without the fear of being detained because, for example, you talk about the corruption, or you talk about something that's going on in the government.